Welcome back to Business Week here on Arise News. Now, to get into some of the week's top business headlines with me is Eizu Uwaoma, CEO, Xavier Consulting. Thank you for joining me, Eizu. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Eizu, it's been a very eventful week, we have to say. But let's begin here in Nigeria, where we have some new developments. A new acting CBN governor. Now, many people will say he certainly has his work cut out for him, a lot ahead for him in terms of being a daunting task. What would you make of this new development, and what would you say his priorities should be, rather?
Honestly, we haven't had, once again, as things change, everything remains the same, right? We haven't had an economist as a CBN governor in a while, and this isn't any different. So that's the first fundamental. So I am, good thing is he comes from that sector, but then I wish we had an economist, but here we are. And I think the first thing he has to do, right, first of all, is understand what macroeconomics really is and what the role of the government is as a function. Fundamentally, the government's most important role is to reduce unemployment. When it comes to macroeconomics, reduce unemployment, reduce inflation, and more importantly, stabilize the economy. That will put a lot of pressure on monetary policy. Fiscal policy has to go side to side. So I think his first fundamental role would be for him to stabilize the system, right? And sadly, the stability of the Naira is the number one thing on the agenda. Between May 2023 and now, the Naira has fallen over 40%. By the time the government took over, it was about 500, 600. Now it's almost heading to 1,000, right? That fundamental issue is not driven by government policy or CBN. Like I always say, the stability of Naira will never come from the policies of the government. It will come from warehouses and factories. Until our factories work, right, until government spending, right, is pro-Nigerian. I mean, over 14 billion will be spent on just cars, right? None of them is produced in Nigeria, right? And that's just on the federal level. So I think fundamentally, until we create enabling environment, and that's one of his policies, the first thing he has to do is understand the interdependence between monetary policy and fiscal policy, right? While everyone putting pressure a lot on the CBN, people like FIRS are also important, right? So I think that that's the first thing he has to do. And then secondly is the current house cleaning that's going on in the CBN. I hope that that goes from beyond just the top players all through that whole supply chain, including the real government officials, because as long as there's waste, there's delay, and there's inconsistency in government and in government policies, it would just be a talk shop. So congrats to him, first of all, fundamentally. But then the monetary policy is beyond just stabilizing the Naira. And that stability of that Naira would never, in my own opinion, come from just talk shops. It has to be how the customs ensures that the goods that are banned stays banned, so that, I mean, yesterday I was just talking to a friend, and he explained how he went to a supermarket and then he saw bread that was imported from France, right, into Nigeria, and it sold for over 10,000 naira. So until you have those type of fundamentals curbed, right, you're going to always have a talk shop. But congrats to him, more importantly.
Yeah, certainly. Harmonization of the monetary and fiscal policy would be very key. Do you believe that he's up to the task in this regard, looking at his credentials? I know you mentioned you would have preferred for him to be an economist, but some people will say that's neither here nor there. Do you believe that in terms of his credentials, he will be up to this task? Very briefly.
Yes, absolutely, yes. I mean, he comes from a banking perspective. He's been chairman of Citibank. He's also been a public sector person. So I like the balance, the yin-yang between his private sector experience and the public experience. Yes, I think that that's one of the things that he has to do. But also, we also now need to look at other factors, right? Forex and the whole exchange rate and interest rates are the things that are number one on his agenda. But then, let's not forget that there's a lot of black economy, right, that is also affecting the dollar exchange rate, right? So fundamentally, the remittance, right, how the biggest inflow of dollars into Nigeria is still the remittance, right? What you call the foreign guys who sort of jackpot and are back home, right? If we can sort of look at that and say, okay, how can we be more creative with that? That would work. So his three biggest priorities, in my own opinion, would be the interest rate. The interest rate and inflation has always been inversely proportional, right? So meaning that we expect this is the fourth time in a very short period that we've had a difference in our exchange rate. So we hope that that happens again, right? So inflation would be one of his biggest priorities, and I hope that what he's going to do is try to see how, if we need to mop up money from Eurobond, that's something on the table, but more importantly, we need to have our factories and our warehouses working. Nigeria needs to produce what it consumes, and as long as that doesn't happen, I don't know how much more we can wish. Fundamentally.
Certainly, yeah, certainly. And of course, we can only wish him well. And of course, like you mentioned, congratulations to him, Mr. Olayemi Cardoso. And now to oil prices surging to the $95 mark. I mean, $100 on the horizon, even the Chevron CEO said it himself. What do you make of this?
Good news for oil-producing countries, right? Bad news for oil-consuming country. Nigeria is such a quagmire in itself because it's such an irony, and it's a paradox because in the end, we're supposed to be very excited. The last time the price per barrel of oil went this high was in 2014, right? So we're supposed to be excited about this, right? And of course, one of the drivers of this increase would be China. China is back to business, full swing, right? Post-COVID, growth was slow, but now we see how I think China is the biggest, is probably the biggest factor in all of this. Right, and then let's hope that OPEC also sort of manages the supply, right, their supply quota system and all of the agreements that they have. Yes, so it's pretty good for us as Nigerians, except that sadly we export crude oil and import petrol. So that also once again has a direct proportion to our petroleum consumption, right, sadly. But in the next few months, we hope that the refineries start working and then we don't have to take back all of that excesses we've made in dollars into importation. Let's hope that happens.
So there's that hope, certainly. I mean, clearly we can see that supply is going to be constrained for a bit more, as Saudi Arabia and Russia have said they are going to keep those cuts. So, we just have to stay in place for now and see. Well, now from oil prices to a shift in the UK's climate policy. Now, that has received quite a bit of backlash. But of course, the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says that it's merely a shift from a more pragmatic, standpoint to the end goal.
Honestly, it's one of those tough decisions, but someone has to confront the brutal fact. The world isn't ready for that zero carbon emission story. And one of the fundamental reasons for that is the network effect. Right. If you look at electric vehicle is the most consistent and predominant conversation on that agenda. There are other things that cause carbon emission, but if you look at that, I don't think the automobile industry has anywhere in the world has matured enough for that drastic shift, right? If you look at what's happening, I mean, Jaguar Range Rover, which is, in my own opinion, one of the poster boys of a UK brand, right? They're excited about the news because changing all of that whole mechanical system and the assembly line into EV vehicles, right, would create a lot of job loss, right? And right now, the UK government, just like any other government in Nigeria, can't afford that amount of unemployment because of that shift. That's fundamental. And don't forget also the fact that the per capita income of UK is not in its all-time high. Can the average UK person afford to buy an EV vehicle as against the current one? So these are the real issues. Someone has to have that commission. I'm glad he's able to have it. Yes, it's a blow on the consensus and all of the 2050 agenda for zero carbon emission. But then it's really a game of what you want versus what you want most, right? The temporary solution to the permanent problem is for us to take it slowly. And don't forget also the supply chain and the value chain of electric vehicles. We don't have enough charging ports yet. The world doesn't have that, and that's a network effect model in itself. It's sort of like what would happen if everyone starts to use the same device. It becomes cheaper, but that hasn't happened. So I think the fact that they're running it slowly in a time series, it's perfect for what it is. So newer companies, automobile companies will be the losers. The older ones will be the winners. So people like Kia, for example, Kia is sort of like that underdog in that market. They are sort of like a blow to them because it's easy for them to sort of change technology really fast than maybe a Ford or a Range Rover Jaguar. These are like almost a century-old business models, right? Because it's beyond just the market. It's also about the factory, right? The guys who own the factory would be the ones who would be the biggest challenge to them. But more importantly, I think that ripple effect would hit other countries as well. Because UK once again is one of the poster boys for that conversation on climate change. Now, if a UK is dumbing down, it means that every other person has some audacity to dumb down. But hey, there
certainly will be a ripple effect there. But in light of all of that, do you see any rationalization for proponents of the 2030 agenda? Do you see any sense to what they are pushing back for?
Yes, it's economics, right? It's basic economics 101, right? The world needs, there's too much going on at the same time, right? The world is in that place where every government's fundamental role right now is the well-being of its people first, beyond the well-being of the entire world, right? So it's very sad, but then that's just the reality on ground. Everyone look out for we're all supposed to look out for ourselves first before everyone else, right? And that's just how it's just the irony of life, I guess.
So you're saying don't put the cart before the horse. Let's do things in order. All right, so let's move now to some entertainment business world and developments in there. We've seen Disney decide to bolster a business that is more reliably profitable. What would you say that move, how has that resulted in repercussions negatively for it?
Well, funny enough, I'm not sure how the market's reacting, right? First of all, the investors they made an announcement of over $60 billion investment, right, around what is an argument, because post-COVID, I mean, one of Disney's poster boy once again will be Disneyland, right? But don't forget that Disney as a brand has so many revenue streams and so many subsidiaries. Of course, the ones that are very popular would be like the Disney World, would also be their role in entertainment and media. They own a lot of the broadcasting and cable channels. But where they are putting their money in, right, it's the good old hands-off matrix in business, what the teachers in business school. Is it product development, market development? Sadly, what they're trying to do is not market development, it's product development. So they're trying to renovate a lot of their parks. So I think the market is edgy, right? The market is reacting very well to what they want to do with $60 billion. That's a lot of money. And what they want to do with it is renovate parks, right? Expand a lot of their outdoor business-oriented brands, right? And that's back to consumer behavior. It just suggests one thing: are we more outdoor than indoor post-COVID, right? And I don't know what that answer is. People like Zoom, for example, can tell its workers to come back to the office. Zoom is supposed to be a virtual, right? So because I think that's a perfect argument. If you look at the model of what they're using the money for, it's really around their outdoor, right? Don't forget they're also one of the biggest in hotels and hospitality. So yes, it would take another 1 year, 2 years for us to see how the market will react. But if you look at it as a curve, I think that it's almost like an inverted U shape, right? The market will be excited, and at some point they reach a threshold and they're just uncertain. Like right now, the market is uncertain. Their price per share, the share price per unit is actually in a very delicate place, right? In the next few months, I think a lot of people are just watching to see how that pans out, right? And yeah, let's see how that goes.
You know, it's interesting you use the U-shape analogy because, you know, the market was just as excited about Disney going into the streaming world. Yeah. Let's look at that. And why would you say in relation to comparatively like Netflix, why is Disney not seeing those kinds of returns from the streaming space?
So that's why the conversation is fundamentally on what are they going to put their money in? Are they going to put it in the more extroverted or outdoor product lines, or the introverted product lines? Like streaming is an introverted, right? So they also realize that they should concentrate on what they're the best at and what they're good at, right? You're not going to think of Disney and you think of Disney's next breakthrough going head-to-head with like a Netflix or any of those online streaming platforms. So I think that it's safety, really. And if you ask me, Walt Disney, the fundamental founders culture of Walt Disney has always been built around external imaginations. And I think that that's really what it is. Because I'd expect that $60 billion, if you look at how that money will be spent, I would have expected a lot more of it to be around the online space, but that's not what's happening. It's around a lot of the offline space, real estate, reconstructions, renovations, expansion into newer terrains, you know. So yeah, it's an interesting case study, and it's an argument on whether brick and mortar is still a valid business model as against all of the tech tech madness.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a good way to approach it. Well, now to news that all Apple lovers and collectors are quite excited about. We have the release of the new iPhone 15 series. Are you one of the people racing to get your new one, Eizu?
Well,
I can't keep up with Apple anymore. I just can't.
Well, the thing about Apple is I like their. I feel like what the CEO of Apple says, Cook and them would be, let's not own the factory, let's own the market, right? They've never really been interested in, I don't think of Apple as product excellence. I think about them as market excellence, right? So I think it's I'll look at them as,
expand on that a little bit before we move on.
I'll look at them as more of, their strength is in marketing and perception. The only thing more important than what you'd ever sell is what you make the buyer believe that he's buying. If you look at the difference between the iPhone 15 that just released September 22, it's going to almost all the stores in the most important stores that they have across different countries, you find out that there's no significant difference between 15 and 14, right? Or 14 and 13. So what they've just sold to us is perception. I think they understand the cognitive bias of young people and they've just leveraged on that. But don't forget that any strategy you use over a sustained period of time starts to become sort of like annulled, right? So the first thing I noticed about the new iPhone 15 is it doesn't have any extraordinary feature, right, which we expect. They haven't had any product with an extraordinary feature in the series for a very long time. So that's the first problem, but they still stuck to what they're used to, the price decoy, where they have like 3 series. It's a very interesting model. It's a decoy, right? You have 3 products, and then you have one at $600, you have one at maybe $1,200, and then you have another one for $1,400, right? Now, if you look at that, right, you find out that the second series is a decoy for the third series. Like I'm trying to sell you an ice cream, right? And I tell you there are 3 versions of the ice cream. I can sell you an ice cream for 600 naira. I can sell another one for 1,200, and I can sell another one for 1,300, right? Which would you buy? You probably buy the one for 1,300 because the gap between 1,200 and 1,300 is in a lot. That's what they've done with that. So they still stuck to that genius. But generally, the tech gadget business has had a steady decline. So Apple isn't doing, the iPhone 15, the buzz isn't as much as it was compared to when you had an iPhone 10 to 11 or 12. But that's not an Apple problem.
So are you saying the perception is beginning to decline in terms of... I sense an Android user here. The Apple lovers are not going to be very happy with you. But so thank you so much for being on the show with us. Yeah. Thank you so much.